Hi everyone. Today we're going to continue exploring some more about Microsoft Excel and spreadsheets in general. Again, before we begin, you can technically do most of this with something like Google Sheets. However, some of the commands will be slightly different. So I do recommend that you stay using Microsoft Excel. It should be on all your computers. We're going to start by creating a new blank workbook. So we're clicking on something like this. I am using a Mac today, but again, it should look almost identical and certainly function the same way between Mac and Windows. So when you get a new blank workbook, you're going to have something like this. We've seen this at least last week, or last session, I should say, when we started looking at Excel. Very quickly, a few quick reminders. We talk about columns with the ABCs, rows with the 1, 2, 3s, and every cell, as we call one of these little squares, is done with a reference of the column and then the row. So this particular cell would be C3. So it's important that we know how to move around, and when we reference cells, how we refer to them. And when we type into a cell, we're either going to type some text or some numbers that are just going to display on the screen, or if we want to start a formula that can be calculated, remember we always start that with an equals. Okay, let's begin. The idea today is we're going to create another little simulation, not of flipping a coin like last time, but this one we're going to do rolling a dice. Well, we're going to start with rolling one dice, and then your task is going to be to expand this to rolling multiple dice. But we'll talk more about that in a second. So we'll start by giving it a heading. So I'm just going to, in cell B1, put a heading in. I'm just going to call this dice simulator. I can come back and make it look pretty a little bit later on. But right now, just putting it into that space. So I've sort of allocated that space for the heading. I'm going to come down now to B3. And in here, I'm going to put the heading dice. In the next cell across in C3, I'm going to put result. That's my headings for what's going to be my list of which dice and what result I have gotten. And then I'm going to put in one more thing. And I think at the moment, no, actually, we'll leave it at that. Let's get the first part started. So the first thing I want is we're going to put in here just the number 1, just to say this is the first dice that we're going to roll. Remember, I've already mentioned that you're going to end up making this roll several dice at once. I'm just going to show you how to do the first one. So in the result, I want to have a random roll of a dice. So let's think about a dice for a moment. Most traditional dice that we use in board games and so forth have 6 sides, they're a cube, and we usually have the numbers 1 to 6 or some dots to represent the numbers 1 to 6. So we're going to start by simulating just a traditional 6-sided dice. Again, later on, you'll be able to change this to represent other values of numbers, but we are going to start with just that traditional 6-sided dice. So we again want a random value. Last week, we looked at the command where we had random, or abbreviated to rand, and basically that would give us a random number between 0 and 1. And we used that to simulate our dice flip because we could basically say that if the value was greater than 0.5, we were calling that heads, and if it was less than 0.5, that was tails. So we were able to easily take a half and half approach to that result. But that's not going to be very useful for a 6-sided dice or potentially more. We don't want to be picking some small amounts of between 0 and 0.12 or something to try and represent 6 different sides or 10 different sides or potentially 20 different sides or more. So this time we want a more efficient way of having a random number that actually goes between the values that we want. So again, let's think about that traditional dice. We said it has 6 sides, 6 numbers. So we really want to get a random number between 1 and 6. But remember, it has to also include 1 and 6. So be careful when you say that. If you say between 1 and 6, actually you technically don't want to get the value 1 and you don't want to get the value 6. So we should really say something like we want to get a value between 1 and 6 inclusive, so that we have both the value 1 and upper value 6. And Excel has a built-in command for that incorporates that randomness with those number ranges. So we're going to start in this cell in C4 with equals, because it's going to be a formula. And we're going to start typing random. And already you might notice we've got this new command here, rand between. Now, rand between is a function built in Excel that will give us a random number between two numbers and including those numbers. And it will always it'll always return an integer value. Now, if you can't remember the term integer from earlier in digital technology or possibly in maths, an integer is a whole number. So rand between will give us a whole number, not a decimal, a whole number that starts from one lower value up to and including the top value. So when we choose rand between, we need to give it two values as indicated by this tooltip. The bottom value, so what's the lowest number we can get as a whole number, and then it'll be what's the top number that we can get. So in the case of our six-sided dice, our lower number will be the number 1. Separate these parameters by a comma, and our top number will be 6. So this command now says, give me a random integer starting from 1, going up to 6, and any whole number obviously in between. So when I press enter on that, it's showing the number 2 at the moment. Remember, if I put my cursor over that cell and I look up the top to the formula bar, we see the actual formula or the command, but what we see in the square in the cell is the result of this command. So at the moment, the result is 2. Now we also know from last time that if we click and do anything anywhere else, I'm just going to put a space, for example, here and press enter, every cell recalculates. So that 2 is going to change, in this case, to a 5. If I do another one, or happen to stay the same that time, oh, that went to a 6, stayed a 6 that time. We're getting a few 6s in a row, a 5 and a 6, a 6, a 5. So we get, oh, there we go, we've got a 2 that time. So we are getting a set of numbers between 1 and 6. So that is giving us our dice. Okay. So we have essentially one dice being rolled right now. We can get any number between 1 and 6. If I want to have a second dice, here we'll put it number 2 just to say this is second dice, I want that same formula. So I could come in here and type equals rand between and do the whole thing. But as we saw last week, we can also click on this cell, grab that little square in the bottom right corner and just drag it down, and that will duplicate that formula into this cell. So here we are now in C5, and you can see the formula up the top has been duplicated. So we now have 2 dice being rolled. So every time I do something on the page, there we go, the dice has been rolled. Dice has been rolled, a 6 and a 2, a 4 and a 6, a 5 and a 3, and so forth. So we can roll 2 dice. So potentially you should now see how you could get any number of dice that I might ask for. So later on, I might ask you to make 10 dice that roll, and you should be able to do that quite easily. Okay, the next thing I want to do very quickly is just to work out, we'll do a quick equation to work out if the roll of our dice is going to allow us to, let's do a pretend move. So we are going to put the heading need into E3, and we're going to put the word result, can't spell, result into F3. In need, underneath, so in E4, we're going to put the value, a number value that we need in our pretend game to roll if we want to succeed in something. So let's say we're playing, I don't know, Monopoly, and we need a 10 to get to the free parking to get all the money that's there. So we're going to put the number 10 in there. And what we want to do is to have our dice get rolled. We want to look at their total, and then in the result here, decide whether the total matched or was bigger or smaller, for example, than what we needed to get. Okay, so look at the total and do some sort of equation to work out if it's suitable for what we needed. Okay, so we first of all need to get the total of these dice. Let's work out how to do that. Let's put another little heading down here and we'll call that dice total. And next to it this time, we're going to work out the total. So the easiest way to do that is to use cell referencing. We're certainly not going to say equals 4 plus 1 because the next time these dice roll, it will be different. Okay, so we need to reference these two cells to say take the value that's there each time. So over here, we're going to go equals, click on that box because we want the value that's going to be here in C5, say plus, and then click on that box to get the value that's going to be in C4 at any given time. Press enter, and you can see right now, because it's technically recalculated, we've got 2 and 2 for our dice values, and here our total dice value is 4. Again, if we make the computer recalculate by just doing something else, now we have a 5 and a 4, and our dice total is 9. So that's very, very important that we get that right. But I want to show you one other way to do that that's actually more efficient, especially if we start talking about multiple dice. There's a built-in command called sum, which also will add up values, and it will add them up in the same way. You can click on that box, comma, that box, comma, whatever. But the great thing about a formula like sum is it takes a range as well. So instead of having to put every single box in one by one, you could just click and highlight over those two boxes and it will create a range. That's this part in red. I'll just delete that actually to get rid of the extra box and we'll do it one more time. So that is our range. So a range is represented by the first cell, so that would technically be the top left-hand corner, and the bottom right-hand corner. And you think of it as a rectangle. So the first value is the top left-hand corner, the bottom right-hand corner is the second value, and they're separated by a full colon. Now, it doesn't look like it much here, but let's just, for argument's sake, highlight an actual rectangular area. So here I'm saying go from C4, which is this cell up here, and make a rectangle that goes down to this value, K13, and everything inside this box is going to get summed or added together. And that's where the sum formula is really powerful compared to going this plus this plus this plus this plus this plus this and having to plus every single square. You can very, very quickly add a whole heap of numbers together. It's also smart enough to ignore cells that have text in them and just add up things that have a number in them. So if we did try to add this up, it would actually ignore this dice total here and it would in fact add them up properly. It wouldn't work right now though because we're actually overlapping where the answer is going to go and we get something called a circular reference, something that we're not going to worry about today. But let's just go back and fix up dragging over just those two. Close the bracket off to finish that formula and press enter, and you can see it's still working the way we expected. 4 and 5 is of course 9. Let's now do our last step for today, and that is to look at whether what we need is going to work. So in here we're going to use an if statement. So we're going to start with an equals, and we're going to type if bracket, and the first thing we need is the test. What it is that we want to check if it's true or false. So what we simply want to say is the total of the dice equal to the amount that we need? All right, we're not worried about greater or less than at the moment here. We want to know, have we rolled the number that we need? Okay, so let's click on this cell here to say that we want the value that's going to be in this box, and we're going to say equal to, or just the equals, and we're going to click on that box. So this test is saying F6, so the value here in F6 is equal to that value here in E4. Now we put a comma in following the pattern shown in the tooltip. And what we now want to do is put down what we want to be shown in this box as the result if it is true. So we're going to put some text in this case. We're going to get some words to show up. So if we're going to do text, we have to put them inside quotation marks. So I'm going to say, yay, if it's true, because we've got the number we want, all right? And then I put a comma because I now want to do or show what we want if it's false, if they do not equal each other. And for this case, I'm going to put in some more text quotation marks, and I'm going to actually do an old-fashioned sad emoji. So, just something like that, a little sad face. And I have to close my brackets and press enter. So right now we can see we've actually got a sad face because 7 does not equal 10. So the amount of our dice, which is 7, does not equal 10. What we need to do is make this change a few times and hope that we get the numbers that we need. So I'm going to do this until I get the numbers. I'll speed this up though, and I'll just stop it when we get the result that we need. And there we have it. We actually have finally got the result where our total dice is now equal to what we needed, and we now see the yay coming into our results. So what have we done here? We've introduced a new type of random where we can actually control the values. Okay, we can control the upper and lower value. We have introduced a new way of adding values together, especially over a range of spaces where we can highlight the errors we want. And we've also done a little bit more work with if statements where we can check for some sort of condition and respond with either a true or false response. We've used text in this case as our response, but we could easily have put a number there or something else. So once you have made this exact example here, you can pretty it up a bit so that the obvious things are doing things like change the font position, center things, change the fill colors maybe to look a bit like a table, some centering here, and so on. You can make it look prettier. So once you've prettied it up a little bit, I want you to change this so that you have 10 dice getting rolled. Okay. I want the first 5 dice to stay like they are, where they roll between a 1 and a 6. But I want the second 5 dice to roll between let's say, a 5 and a 10. Okay, so I don't want the second 5 dice to be 1 to 6 dice. I want them to roll between 5 and 10 being their possible values. I still want you to keep the dice total, and I still want you to have this needing value, what you need to get, and the result, either yes or no, yay or sad face. But again, pretty this up and make it look a lot nicer, but really just extend this dice, change the values for them, and when I come to see this, when you submit it, I'll be putting in a set value that I want to get, and I'll be expecting your work to basically show me for each spin whether or not I've successfully got the number I want. Okay? If you would like to extend yourself, then I would like you to add 2 more of this type of thing in, but see if you can do one for whether your number is below what you want to get, and one for if you can be above. So you get a yay in this box, for example, if you've got the exact number like we have now. You might get a box here that says less than if what you have is less than the expected number, and you might have this one here, for example, showing greater than if you have something that is greater than the expected number, and the other boxes, of course, would be blank. So that's a little bit of an extension for those people who want to push themselves. Everything you need to do it has been shown here, so it's just about taking the ideas and modifying them slightly and using them to suit those requirements. See how you go. As always, get into contact if you're having any problems, but make sure you have this finished and ready to submit and put on Schoolbox by the next class that we have in 2 weeks.